Hello and welcome back after the short pause. So our next session will be Historytelling in Education and Dance Mediation. From the personal, individual to the collective, institutional. With Patrizi, do we have a problem? Do you hear me? Yes? No? Do you hear me? Give me a sign. Yes? Okay, because I cannot hear me here. Okay, I cannot hear myself. Good, so we will have an impulse speech from Livia Patrizi, followed by a discussion. Livia, she received her dance training at the Folkwang University in Essen, among other places. This was followed by the engagement with Mats Eck, Pina Bausch, and Maggie Maran, among others. Since 1994, she has also worked as a freelancer choreographer. She's the initiator of the Tanz Site program and the artistic director of Tanzvermittlung, which produces dance for a young audience. Until the beginning of 2019, she led the research and material development project Kunstlabor Tanz, from which the digital practice tool Calypso emerged. Kunstlabor Tanz is partner of the certificate course Artistic Intervention in Cultural Education at the Institute for Cultural Policy at the University of Hildesheim. Welcome, Patrizi.
Each child came to me as a whole, as the only one, the first and the last. I lived for a time in an ancient tower on the crater of one of the extinct volcanoes near Campi Flegrei. One entered it through an avenue lined with oleanders, always closed for the children of the nearby village. I hanged vanilla persimmon branches outside the window to mature. The children shot them with slings and arrows. As was the custom of conquistadors, explorers, and slave traders, I appeased them by throwing them colorful objects: chocolate, coins, and candies. The children became friends with the white woman. They were shy and reverent at first, while she wanted to be an equal in their company. A former vaulted barn overlooking the inner courtyard was cleaned and painted, equipped with tables left by the masons in the shed and chairs taken from the tower chapel, large rolls of wrapping paper, jars full of colors made from earth and metal powders mixed with glue. The finest brushes of the house painters were placed in the troughs. The clay was collected in the countryside. The stuff for the theater was found in the attic. The school was held there. The paintings were of a large format. Sometimes one had to climb a ladder to complete them. They often represented scenes from everyday life. The community of males was getting ready to kill the pig. When they carried him, a child danced on his back. While they were killing him, another proudly held his tail. Then the sick girl drank the blood from the bowl. Everyone loved to cover the sheets with their hand and footprints. The footprints always followed one another in a marching position and were left white while the sheet was colored. The hands on the other side were colored red or orange and were in various and asymmetrical positions, as if announcing 1,000 things to be done. And one day, when Ninetto counted them and wrote 7 hands underneath, it seemed to me that I was the child. He was the adult. There were chestnuts, woods around the village when we went into this wild and shady kingdom, guided by Sabetta, the eldest and most adventurous of the kids, who beat her stick hard into the ground to warn off the snakes. We were reluctant to return, since there, outside of history, in the womb of the woods, it was as if we, and truly everything, was for the first time. For example, an insect on whose gray and brown back was depicted a man's face, similar to that of certain African wooden statues. Antonio, a well-known beetle crusher, spared him for this resemblance. L'Espresso was the best newspaper to use for cutting out letters. Everyone saw them in a different color. One little girl had fallen in love with the O. She kept singing it, refusing the other vocals, and everyone nicknamed her Fat Ball. Because, plump as she was, she portrayed herself in those O. It may have created some confusion among the pupils, but it was good to know from the start that people far away in time and space had used different characters for the same sound, just as the children were pointing at the same things in dialect that the customers at the bar on the corner pointed out in Italian. Why don't these damn letters have a smell so that one can recognize them immediately? Asked one child as the smell of pasta and beans came over from the kitchen. It happened sometimes that after the words had performed 1,000 acts, as in a magician's show, a child understood the trick. A pre-earthquake stillness could be read in his eyes. Then each letter would begin to tremble and shudder and vibrate alongside the others, until the word was there, whole, with the body of the thing it indicated.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me for this wonderful organization, everybody. Thank you. So I guess I put this here. So the title and the text that Nora just read were written by my mother and taken from the preface of one of her books called The Children Island. Naples, was in the 60s and 70s the center of several initiatives that aimed to make the revolution starting from the children. The projects lasted several years, during which proposals were also made to the Minister of Education, for example, such as giving a subsidy, money, to families equivalent to the wages of the working children to avoid the evasion of compulsory schooling. For 6 years, every day from 9 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my mother began first welcoming the children who lived near her house in a neighborhood where the countryside was disappearing to make space for property speculation. Later, she founded, with other companions, an association working with street children, an evening school for adults, and an initiative to organize the many unemployed Neapolitans into a political movement. In my contribution today, I want to focus on class exclusion, social class exclusion, linking these initiatives in Napoli, my own work in Berlin, and our current national challenges in the field of dance transmission. The mother. My mother was born in 1936 into a wealthy Neapolitan family. She grew up with the complex of the mother-nanny conflict, the gap between the world of the rulers, her mother, and the world of the servants, the Majorcan nanny who had raised her. She loved the nanny very much, who taught her not only the Majorcan dialect, but also the language of the poor. After becoming politically active, she began to publish novels and short stories and became a recognized writer. In spite of her writing skills, when she described her socio-political work, she did not write about the children or about the unemployed, but collected and gave space to their stories instead, using the power of her voice to publish them so that they would be heard. Through their stories, she also gave voice to the lost nanny who had mothered her. Only after giving voice to the nanny, I was able to give voice to the lady. I could not write for an illiterate person before trying to give them a voice, she writes. Since a very early age, she perceived a distance from her own world, that of the rulers, which was reinforced by her mother's real and physical distance toward her. A class complex, but also a conflict of the body, which, even if expressed in various forms, marked her entire life. I was saved by the children, by the discovery of the children in the narrow streets of Naples, and by the little girl in the streets of the unconscious that was in me. She writes in the preface to the Children Island. But how did they work? Which methods they use with the children? Let's look at the title of this contribution. Each child came to me as a whole, as the only one, the first, the last. Whole could mean having in front of us the person in all his entirety as a human being, and not the scholar as a mess among scholars, to be taught with the same method for all. Unique could mean that we are all different, that we have different histories, lives, and topics. The first could mean that the teacher is also ignorant of the knowledge of the scholar. The last could mean to take the responsibility that one has just in that moment with that student, in that situation, with its specific challenges and discoveries. But also the sentence said by one of the children, "Why don't these damn letters have a smell so that one can recognize them immediately?" reveals us a possible teaching attitude, linking the damn letters to something that the child knows, something that is part of his culture, such as pasta and beans. Those initiatives in the 60s and 70s were at the same time mocked by the same left-wing political movements that my mother belonged to. We have to make the revolution, and you are wasting your time wiping the children's asses, they told them. So most of the crew who shuttled their ship between the children island and the adult continent choose the 68 movement at some point. My mother writes, neither the movement of 68, not later feminism, placed children at the center of their work. For those who were children of their own, community solutions were aimed more at carving out time for their own political activities than at the well-being of the children themselves, who were usually parked in bed, kindergartens, and confined to the smoke-filled spaces of tobacco and words, of political meetings or assemblies. The daughter. So, while on the one hand I grew up in the middle of an immense and diverse cultural and human heritage, on the other hand I was one of those children who went to ugly kindergartens during the day and to political meetings of the grown-ups at night. I took revenge as best as I could. One day, we children took the salaries that the adults had just put into the collective box for food, it was a lot of money, and gave it all to some poor people on the street. To the very angry grown-ups we said, "You taught us to do so." I then escaped the smoke-filled rooms of my childhood to attend dance academies and universities. I danced around the world and ultimately founded Tanzheit in 2005, a work that I define as political. When I started teaching in schools, I had no idea about it. I felt a mysterious bond with the most neglected kids, which were, of course, also the toughest to teach. I was intuitively very good at working with such children. We were bound not by class affiliation, but by a common belonging to having felt deprived, more or less, of the care that the child needs. Therefore, in a way, I was also saved by the children. And with Tanzheit, I created an island that tries to build as many bridges as possible between the field of reception with professional performances for young audience, that of mediation with our annual projects in schools, and that of training for artists and teachers. We have recently redefined the program as a place for cultural bonding, kulturelle Bindung statt Bildung. Constantly united by a cycle of action and reflection, we intend with this definition to express that the concept of bonding, when not disturbed, must be reciprocal. We always try to create a mutual exchange and a sustainable connection between people and dance art, but also between dance and the world. This means, for example, to find ways to dance the smell of pasta and beans, and to give the kids the chance to express themselves through the language of dance before they come and watch art. Many reformers and thinkers started from education as an engine for the transformation and emancipation of society. My mother was nourished, among others, by the theories of the French Freinet couple, who did not propagate methods that belong to one creator and cannot be changed, but a natural path to be understood as learning through experience, collaboration with peers, and a collective review of mistakes. Nora often speaks of the Brazilian reformer Paulo Freire and his pedagogy of the oppressed, with his notion of dialogue, again, which needs hope and mutual trust, consisting of both critical thinking and concrete actions together. More recently, with a fear in the field of cultural mediation, and also we as Tanzheit, to the French philosopher Jacques Rancière, who was mentioned also yesterday, and his book, the ignorant schoolmaster. Rancière assumes that everyone has equal intelligence, which is not manifested equally, but is equal in all its form of manifestation. These theories, as varied as they are, strive to transform the narrative of the so-called ignorant versus the so-called educated, and to promote a critical consciousness to seek alternatives to the arrogance of the Western and Eurocentric canon by transforming the role of teachers and learners so that education can be emancipatory. So, what about the dance field? Can dance, mediation, and education become a motor for a revolution toward a more equal and emancipatory practice of art? If we replace the word revolution with the more appeasing word transformation, we arrive from the 60s in the middle of the current debates about art and the issue of cultural discrimination, which everyone currently expresses with the word diversity. The history of dance education, like the history of education in general, is a history of exclusion. The historical perspective at education is the look that has shaped the Western cultural canon and the borders of citizenship. What does not belong to this canon is placed on the margins, is otherness, and without power of speech. On this theoretical level, it seems that lately, in the field of culture, almost everyone has agreed. If we focus on the field of cultural mediation, it is even worse. Today, not a single politician of any party would publicly affirm that art mediation is comparable with wiping the asses of the kids, or of the elderly, or of the disabled. A few days ago, a new study on diversity in cultural institutions had just been published, and the chief of the Deutsche Kulturrat asks himself, truly surprised and worried, why so few people of Turkish origin are employed in the cultural institutions. We urgently need to do further investigations about it, he writes. As the answer to this question was not just a couple of centuries old. This kind of consensus, if not supported by action, is dangerous and smart. It is capitalism. It is the principle of meritocracy, and it works like this. Every German but Turkish-looking child born in a family of low social status can go to public schools, to university, and become the president of the Deutsche Kulturrat if he really wants, and if he really works very, very hard. Of course, he has to work very, very hard. That applies, of course, also for the German kid born in a poor countryside, maybe of the former East Germany, and growing up in an orphanage or in an institute for blind people. The split between education and culture is one of the mechanisms with which our society, and therefore also culture, justifies and reproduces the current social inequality. The winners of these processes are those who have been able to grab most of the cultural capital. Their game's rules prevail and later determine which culture is legitimate and which is not. The fact is, systemically, there cannot be a more diverse art without a more equitable artistic education. The field of mediation and art education are crucial for a transformation of culture because they act at the base, at the beginning of the chain of exclusion. And it's precisely the lack of continuity of access to art education from public schools to universities that causes that many people are denied the tools that would allow them to participate and to create the art of today and of tomorrow. At the intersection of art, politics, and social issues, new working fields and different skills have developed in dance mediation. Access is thought of in both directions. How does art get into society, but also how can art evolve through the knowledge of society, the whole society? But if the expertise is not used for the renewal of art and academic studies, the field becomes part of a dance mediation education system that is still operating structurally, mainly separately from one another. In this context, the world of contemporary dance can, for example, learn a lot from urban or society dance. For a young hip-hop or crump urban dancer, for example, it is normal at only 24 years old, not only to win the most important battles, so to dance on a very high level, but also to have already taught in 4 continents. They grew up with the responsibility of growing the crump hip-hop community and spreading the art and life form they love, deeply rooted in their professional practice. On a necessary paradigm shift in cultural policy, Henning Moore from the Kulturpolitische Gesellschaft recently wrote, "Much has been said in recent months about the social relevance of cultural productions. This is certainly immanent to culture on a social meta level, but must be proven and negotiated again and again in everyday practice, considering the participation of as many people as possible. A transformation-oriented cultural policy must demand that cultural productions should be thought far more clearly from the perspective of mediation. Since this field of action organizes the transfer of knowledge between producers and recipients. Despite decades of debate since 1970, this paradigm shift has never been seriously initiated. Up to the present day, the mediation field is almost always the weakest part of the organization and has usually little influence within the institutions. The struggle to improve conditions for artists is important and necessary, but it is not the same struggle as the one of access. Those who try to make a living as artists have already had access, despite their more or less precarious condition, to resources that many did not have in the first place. If you have parents, little brothers, sisters, who expect you to bring home money, you certainly cannot afford the luxury of being a freelance professional artist or to go to an art university. So we have 2 different struggles, access and artist conditions. One solution will be to unite them and fight to redistribute cultural resources more fairly on the one end, and also to pressure for funding to come from other ministries, like education and also other ones, on the other hand. Then, separating the struggles is also a very old and still effective trick of capitalism. Divide and conquer. But to act united means a paradigm shift, and this is the hardest part of the work. It means to overcome the well-established hierarchy of thoughts that separates art and the transmission of art. We need a new concept of art that does not reproduce the aesthetic canon and the access policy of the current ideology. Diversity invites you to the party. Inclusion invites you to dance. But equity redistributed space and resources so that the formal guest can host their own parties. Therefore, I propose to the Dachverband Tanz to host and organize and financiate a comprehensive roundtable, to write a new roadmap for art, mediation, and education in order to move from diversity towards more equality and equity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Livia, for this speech. I need to put the scarf here with the red color so that we still have a thread from the presence of your mother. And I think we have good time for discussions. And oops, it's jumping again. Stuff is jumping from my hands. For me, it was very special to go through a very personal approach and starting from your own childhood and recognizing how the personal narratives are carried throughout our lives, and they don't end at a specific place, but they also guide our dreams and how we can realize those dreams. And you managed to make a big shift and create an organization, Tanzzeit. It reminds me of an informal conversation with Michael Freund on the very first day of the symposium, when he said it is necessary that we meet each other, we see each other, because otherwise, usually, in Germany, we see or recognize, as Adham Hafiz mentioned yesterday, we recognize the voices when they are reflected through institutions. And so there is somehow in the understanding and recognition of the critical voices in dance that they have to come through an institutional vehicle. And I think this already has to change in the paradigm of understanding how we communicate and how we see and hear and recognize. But also it's interesting for me to understand how you manage to shift from the individual and also the artistic practice as a dancer and create Tanzzeit. So maybe I also want to create an institution to acquire visibility, or maybe I just want to know how it is created and don't do it, or do it in a different way. I doubt if I do it in a different way, it will still be recognized because it has to obtain the same kind of German order in its creation. But I want to learn from you. What did you do as an individual to found Tanzzeit?
You mean practically?
Yes.
Well, first of all, it was by chance because I was left over in Weimar, and I was all of a sudden pregnant. And the choreographer I worked with at that time, Joachim Schlömer, just said he would go to Basel. And I almost didn't know the father of the child. I mean, it was only 6 months, and I thought, what shall I do? And in a town with 60,000 inhabitants, and without my job, and and with a child, which I wanted to have. So the situation that I had pushed me to dance with anyone who I found in town, because I needed to practice, to dance, to choreograph, to teach. And then I had a request from the old concentration camp of Buchenwald to make a piece with a group of young people who lived there for 1 year, which first I refused because I thought I don't want to go to this team and with a group of non-professional. I never worked with non-professional before. And then I accepted because it was a lot of money. And then, and that was a discovery. It was like a moment where I discovered I love to work with non-professional people that were not kids. So when I moved to Berlin, I was desperately trying to get a contact to the Berlin Philharmoniker because I saw they have an education project and they never answered. And then I saw that Rostam Al-Doum was at some workshop, and I went there and literally attacked him. He was sitting on the little table, and I said, I think your work is so important. I want this, and I want this, and I want. And he was like this, and he said, let's meet. And I was very lucky in the beginning because politically at that time there was a lot of attention on this team through also the work of Simon Rattle and this film who came out, Rhythm Is It, and the world of dance mediation. They distinguish between a time before and a time afterwards because this film put so much attention. So I was also lucky and I was also very motivated, and then it was a little bit everything by chance. I made a piece, professional piece for a young audience. Then the school wanted to have dance, a lot of dance. I didn't know what it was, dance in school. I didn't know who to ask. And then I started to ask all my colleagues, which were all professionals without pedagogical experience. And then it came one by one. We got support from the education and from many, many people of the dance world. I think some people here, I don't know, Sabine, I think she was in the very first symposium in Podeville where we announced for the project, and then it started, and I know that someone, Adrienne Göhler, but I still didn't understand why, she said a German person would have not managed to do it. But I don't know really why, what she meant, but I mean, practically, but yes, it was a lot of jumping in cold water and really not knowing also how it works structurally and, with the whole finances and writing concept and contract and security, in schools and with the kids. But good people around, lots of support.
Yes.
And maybe to make a link, after the childhood I had, I made a break. I went to dance and I went to art and I went into the world, and something was always missing. And when I started Tanzheit, I realized that something from this childhood was very much there, and it came then out. So I could use a lot of things that I learned through the work of my mother and the adults around me. But I discovered it when I started with Tanzheit. I didn't know about it before.
Yeah, it's learning by doing also.
Yes, it was lots of learning by doing.
And I have one more tiny question, and then maybe we open immediately to the Zoom attendees and to the people in the room. The experience of a human race. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know more about the young audiences, their reactions, how they responded to this. Also to understand the current and most immediate receptions after Corona, because I know it started digitally in the beginning, but then it transformed into a physical performance with physical audience. And I'm also curious to know from you how it felt for the children receiving again this kind of performativity, and in relation to cramp work being choreographed for the stage.
We had a very interesting double experience with this piece. One with the children in the morning with the school classes, and also one in the afternoon with the mixed audience. In the afternoon it was like this, that it's really like this, that different contents, different topics brings different audiences. I mean, the question we had, how do we get a more diverse audience? The response we had with this piece just bring different topics, different contents on stage, and then we had real different audience than from the other production that we made. That was one thing. And for the kids, and which were a bit older, we have the same experience in Berlin and also in Wien. It's a bit like Grishka said this morning, you could feel that something really got to them. Like they were trying to understand afterwards about the circle and the borders and what it was. But the atmosphere was like this, and also the bringing together Kramp with Stravinsky, and it was great that they didn't question one second, what was this music with this dance form. They they felt it as something which is absolutely goes together. And so it was really great to be able to talk also to them about Crump and about the Rite of Spring, you know, which is something which they mostly don't know. So, and I think the one really helped the other. And what was interesting was the conversation afterwards, the kind of question they asked, that I cannot keep them all here, but it was really intense. So I'm really curious to see more of performances. Yeah, yeah.
Very good. And you were the dramaturg of the piece, yes? Yes, and I think also we should mention Amelie Malman as a Tanzkomplizen person who was also involved in this project and running it. So let's also move now to the questions from the Zoom, and then maybe later at the end I can come back with a couple of more questions. We have Stefanie Katzer. Yes. We cannot hear. Yes? Is it the Zoom or is it our own speakers here? I don't know. Please say something. Try to say something. Maybe.
You have to put the microphone. Das Mikrofon.
Okay, or maybe you can type it. Type the question, please. We will see it here as a text. Yes. We should go on.
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay.
If there's someone else.
And then we will come back to your question. Maybe there is another person on Zoom or here in the room. Otherwise, I have more questions, but yes, please save yourselves from my questions. Mai, yes.
Hello. It's so tall here. Yeah, I'm very interested actually also in working with children and with young people. But I find it still so difficult to access school or because the whole system, actually the whole educational system is so strict, is so putting ideas in drawers, putting kids in drawers, putting, there's so much evaluation of everything. So it's like a whole, it's like a whole system. And then, I mean, I worked also long years ago with kids, also with like kids in Sonderschulen, like who are like difficult kids and so on. And you enter, you do the project, and you feel that there is a very big change. Today in the morning, I was also chatting with Raphael about this projects at school. It is like a small project. It's a point, and then it goes. The system is so big. So first of all, we cannot enter every school, and we cannot do this at every community. And there's a whole system which needs actually to be changed. I think it's really difficult to teach kids still in this way, at this century. So what do you think, where to start from? Because it's so frustrating. You enter, there's a lot of things happens at the school during such projects, and then we go out, and then everything goes back to the way it was before, or it makes a very small change. So my question is also like, how to keep that continuity, not to do just like punctual projects and then they disappear lately after a year, but like where to start, really, where to start, because it's so important to work with the children, because they form everything later, but like really where to start Do you have any suggestion to change the world? Yeah, I leave you for your difficult answer.
Thank you for your question. No, it's a good question, because at the beginning, when we started, I asked myself, how do we want to go inside schools? And the answer was, we want to go inside the system. We want to go in to work with the whole class. You know? And the reason for that was that if you start to offer dance as an option, you know, then only certain kids would come. So we were aware that it was the very difficult job to work with the whole class, because we dance is on a subject, but we do it in between, you know, and the teachers is always present, you know. And so it's what you say is true on one side, and on the other side, and not only from you, I heard it also during Corona, I was in lots of, you know, a conference, is also prejudice about school, because the system is what it is, you know, and we know that the education system, you know, doesn't teach the kids the jobs of tomorrow and has to be renovated and everything. But there are wonderful people inside schools, wonderful teachers, and also a lot of people who try to make school in a very different ways. And there are schools who are really working hard towards this direction. So what we, our strategy is to go inside and then try to help, you know, the movement of change that wants to move from the inside. So we work very close with the teachers, and there's a lot of respect of the two different roles. You know, the teachers respect that artists at a knowledge they don't have, and the other way around. So this form of dialogue and of respect is the base, because the teachers have the knowledge of the school and of the pupils. They see them every day, you know, and the artist comes once or twice a week. But if there is a mutual support and respect, then it works, and then. So it works there where change wants to happen, and our choice was to try to go from the inside. And of course, it doesn't always work. You have also failure, and you know. But if you are outside the system, because a lot of artists say, we don't want to go to school because it's too much and it's like this, then how do you try to make a small change? You know, because especially with dance, then only some kids come. It's hard to get them come at the beginning in free time activities, and only girls who want to do ballet, you know, and not boys, and also, you know, with the prejudice, class exclusion, class problem, you know.